A moving story of redemption, love, passions, and new beginnings. She was pregnant, covered in bruises, and passed out alone on the sidewalk. When the millionaire stopped his car, he saw the face of the woman who broke his heart 8 years ago. But she was hiding a secret that could destroy his empire or save them forever. Watch this story until the end. You will be surprised by this story. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. Every day we post videos like this. Continuing. Winter arrived with a grey silence when Amelia, wrapped in a worn overcoat and her soul wounded by secrets she could barely name, fainted on the sidewalk of an upscale neighborhood. The biting cold of the Santa Catarina Mountains seemed to penetrate not only the worn fabric of her clothes, but also her bones, reaching the core of a pain she had carried for months like an invisible burden. 5 months pregnant, her face marked by bruises that were beginning to yellow at the edges, remnants of a violence she preferred to forget. She was the very image of defeat. Every step she took through the deserted streets of the Anita Garibaldi neighborhood was a superhuman effort. Every breath a silent victory against the fear that haunted her like a shadow. She had walked for hours since getting off the bus at the bus station, spending the last few reais she had on a ticket that brought her from Florianopolis to there, fleeing from a man whose influence extended far beyond his electoral promises. When her legs finally gave out, and she collapsed onto the wet sidewalk of one of the city's most imposing mansions, the headlights of a luxury car illuminated her fallen silhouette, and the world stopped for a second. The black Porsche Cayenne slowed down abruptly, and for a moment, only the sound of light rain filled the space between the woman on the ground and the man watching her through the windshield. Lorenzo de Alvia never expected that the face of the unconscious woman on the ground would be the same one he had been trying to forget for the past 8 years. At 35, heir to a technology empire that stretched across the southern part of the country, he had learned to control every aspect of his life with the surgical precision of someone who could not afford the luxury of spontaneity. His fortune, marked by family scandals and cold alliances, was built on pillars of control and predictability. But there on that dark sidewalk, the past he had so carefully buried resurfaced like an apparition. Amelia was not just a fragment of his past. She was the woman who one day refused his proposal to run away, disappearing without explanation and taking with her a part of his soul that he was never able to recover. 8 years. 8 years since that night when he proposed to her under the Hercílio Luz Bridge in Florianopolis, offering her not only his love, but a whole life away from everything that hurt her. She had said yes, that she would run away with him, that they would start a new life in another country. But the next morning she had disappeared without a trace. Lorenzo parked the car haphazardly on the side of the street and got out, his heart pounding in a way he hadn't felt in years. He approached her cautiously, almost fearing that she was a mirage, a cruel trick of his own mind. But when he knelt beside Amelia and saw the face that had haunted his dreams, now marred by bruises and a sickly pallor, he knew that fate had decided to reopen barely healed wounds. "Amelia," he whispered, touching her shoulder lightly. She was cold, wet from the drizzle, and her breathing was irregular. It was then that he noticed the subtle curve of her belly beneath her coat. Pregnant. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Without hesitation, Lorenzo lifted her off the ground, surprised at how much weight she had lost. In his arms, she looked even more fragile than she had in his memory, and he felt a fury rise in his chest as he noticed the bruises. Someone had hurt Amelia. Someone had put their hands on her, and the mere thought made his hands shake with pent-up rage. He drove her to the San Jose hospital as fast as he could, breaking all the city's speed limits. During the drive, she lay unconscious in the passenger seat, and Lorenzo couldn't take his eyes off her at the traffic lights. How had she gotten here? Why was she alone, pregnant and injured? And why, after 8 years, was she showing up right at his doorstep? At the hospital, Lorenzo used all his influence to ensure that she received the best care. The de Alvia name opened doors in San Francisco, and within 15 minutes, Amelia was being examined by a full medical team. He waited in the hallway, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, alternating between anxiety and a dull anger that grew with each passing minute. It was Dr. Miranda, the Dalvia family's doctor for decades, who gave him the first information. She's stable, Lorenzo. Severe dehydration, mild malnutrition, and signs of recent physical trauma. She needs rest and care, but both she and the baby are out of immediate danger. The doctor paused, taking in the youngest Dalvia's tense expression. Do you know this woman? I knew, was all Lorenzo could say. When he was finally allowed to see her, Amelia had already woken up. She was sitting on the stretcher in the private room, her arms crossed over her chest in a defensive gesture he knew well. When he saw her enter, her eyes widened in a mixture of shock, fear, and something he couldn't quite decipher. Lorenzo. Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper, laced with a disbelief that mirrored his own. Hi, Mel. The nickname came out naturally, as if 8 years hadn't passed, as if she hadn't abandoned him without explanation, as if they were still those young lovers who dreamed of running away together. Amelia closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if trying to prepare herself for battle. When she opened them again, there was a firmness there that Lorenzo didn't remember from before. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice more controlled now. I brought you. You passed out in front of my house. Lorenzo approached her slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. Amelia, what happened to you? Who did this? He pointed discreetly to the bruises on her face. She looked away, hugging her arms tighter to her body. None of your business. What do you mean it's none of my business? Lorenzo's voice came out louder than he intended, causing a nurse passing by in the hallway to glance curiously into the room. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to lower his tone. You disappear from my life without explanation. Disappear. For 8 years, and now you show up pregnant and injured on my doorstep. How is that none of my business? Amelia stared at him with an intensity that made him take a step back. Because you're no longer a part of my life, Lorenzo. You made your choice 8 years ago, and I made mine. What choice? You left. You're the one who abandoned me. I didn't abandon anyone. Her voice shook slightly, betraying her apparent firmness. I left because I had no other choice. Lorenzo sat down in the chair next to the stretcher, running his hands through his hair in frustration he couldn't hide. So, explain it to me. Tell me what happened that night. Why did you disappear? For a long moment, only the sound of medical equipment filled the silence between them. Amelia looked down at her hands, which rested on her rounded belly, and Lorenzo watched her every movement, every breath, as if he wanted to memorize it all again. I was pregnant, she said finally, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. The revelation hit him like a bolt of lightning. Pregnant in 2016, from your son. The words came out clipped, painful. I was going to tell you that night after you proposed. I thought it was a sign that it was the right time. She looked up at him, and Lorenzo saw unshed tears glistening there. But when I got home, he was waiting for me. Who is he? Amelia hesitated, and Lorenzo saw the genuine fear that crossed her face. Carlos Alberto Mendez. The name made Lorenzo's blood run cold. Carlos Alberto Mendez, a 3-term state deputy, known for his political influence and rumors of unconventional problem-solving methods. A powerful man with connections that stretched all the way to Brasilia, and a reputation that combined public charisma with private brutality. The deputy, Lorenzo murmured, beginning to connect the dots. He knew about our relationship. He knew about the proposal. He had pictures of us, intercepted conversations, everything. Amelia's voice grew weaker with each word. He said if I didn't break up with you and marry him, he would destroy you. He would destroy your family, your company, everything. Lorenzo felt anger explode inside his chest, but he forced himself to keep his voice controlled. And you believed him? He wasn't bluffing, Lorenzo. You don't understand the power this man has. He showed me documents, evidence of wrongdoing in your company, things that could have sent your father to jail. Amelia wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. And there was more. Pictures of you, places you went, schedules you kept. He'd been watching you for months. So you chose him to protect me. I chose to disappear. I wasn't going to marry that monster, but I couldn't condemn you either. Amelia touched her belly again. I ran away at dawn, caught the first bus to Sao Paulo. I thought that if I disappeared, he would lose interest in both me and you. What about the baby? What happened to our son? The silence that followed was deafening. Lorenzo saw the pain flash across Amelia's face like a blade, and knew the answer would be devastating even before she spoke. He found me 3 months later. He had investigators, contacts everywhere. No matter where I hid, he always found me. Her voice was a thin thread now. When he found out I was pregnant, he said the child could only be his. He sent 3 men to get me. Lorenzo clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. Amelia, they hurt me a lot that day. They beat me until I started bleeding, and then they took me to a place where... She stopped, unable to continue. Where what? Where they made me lose the baby, and made sure I could never have children. Naturally again, the last sentence came out as a broken whisper. Lorenzo felt his world crumble around him. The revelation was worse than any nightmare he could have imagined. Amelia had lost their son because of the threat of a man he had never even met. And, worse, she had been tortured, mutilated, destroyed inside and out. How are you pregnant now, then? The question came out harsher than he intended. Amelia's face fell again, returning to that defensive expression he'd seen when she'd first woken up. Treatment, IVF, it was a miracle to get it. But there was something in her voice, in the way she looked away, that didn't add up. Lorenzo knew Amelia too well not to notice when she was leaving out something important. Whose baby is this, Amelia? Mine, she replied too quickly. I know it's yours. I'm asking who the father is. She didn't answer, just stared out the bedroom window, where the rain was now beating down harder. Lorenzo approached the stretcher, sitting down on the edge of it carefully. Mel, you can trust me. After everything we've been through, you know you can trust me. I can't, she whispered. I can't trust anyone. He hurt you again, didn't? That's why you're here, alone and hurt. Amelia closed her eyes, and Lorenzo saw a tear run down her face. The confirmation came not in words, but in the almost imperceptible tremor of her shoulders. How long were you with him? 3 years, she admitted, her voice breaking. 3 years of trying to have a baby, 3 years of being his. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, maybe he'd stop chasing me. Maybe he'd stop threatening you. Amelia. Lorenzo reached out, lightly touching her arm. She flinched at the touch, and he felt his heart break a little more. When I finally got pregnant, he changed. He became possessive, violent. He said that now I could never leave his side again, that the child would be the guarantee that I would stay forever. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Last night he said that after the baby was born he would get rid of me, that he had served his purpose. You ran away. I ran. I grabbed everything I could carry in a backpack and ran. I didn't have enough money to go far, so I came here. I don't know why, maybe because here I felt safe for once. Lorenzo looked at her face, etched with pain and exhaustion, and made a decision that would change everything for both of them. Come with me. What? Come home with me. You can't be alone, not in this state, and he won't find you there. Amelia shook her head immediately. I can't do that to you. You don't understand the danger I pose. If he finds out I'm with you. Let him come, Lorenzo said, and there was a dangerous coldness in his voice that made Amelia shiver. 8 years ago I was a scared boy who couldn't protect you. Today I'm not that boy anymore. Lorenzo, you don't know this man. He's capable of anything. And so do I. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Amelia, I lost you once because of him. I won't lose you again. Come with me. She was silent for a long moment, and Lorenzo could see the internal battle she was waging with herself. Fear fought against hope, distrust against the desperate need for security. What if he hurts you because of me? That's my problem. What if he finds out about what happened between us 8 years ago? Let him find out. Lorenzo, her voice was a plea. Trust me. Just this once, trust me. Amelia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, there was a cautious resolve there. Just until I get my act together. A few days. A few days, he agreed, knowing that wouldn't be true. Now that he had found her, now that he knew the truth, Lorenzo didn't intend to let her go again. Not this time. 2 hours later, after signing the medical discharge and buying Amelia new clothes at a local store, Lorenzo drove along the winding roads that led to his coastal estate. The mansion stood alone, built on a cliff overlooking the rough seas of the southern part of the island. It was here that he came when he needed to think, when business became too overwhelming, when the solitude he had chosen to live became unbearable. Amelia had been silent the entire journey, watching the landscape through the window with an expression that mixed nostalgia and apprehension. Lorenzo respected her silence, using the time to process everything he had discovered. Carlos Alberto Mendez. The name echoed in his mind like a promise of revenge. The Dalvia estate stretched across nearly 20 acres of preserved land, with the main house built in a contemporary style, all glass and exposed concrete blending seamlessly into the natural landscape. When Lorenzo pulled into the driveway, Amelia got out of the car slowly, looking around as if she couldn't believe where she was. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It was supposed to be ours," he replied without thinking, and immediately regretted it when he saw her face crumple in pain. Inside the house, Lorenzo showed him the guest room on the ground floor, overlooking the inner garden. The room was spacious and comfortable, with a private bathroom and a small balcony that overlooked a garden of native plants. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said, setting the bags of clothes on the dresser. "The kitchen is always stocked, and if you need anything, just call me. My room is upstairs." "Thank you," Amelia said, but there was a formal distance in her voice that hurt him. "Mel." He stopped in the doorway, turning to face her. "I know you're scared. I know you don't trust me like you used to, but I need you to know that I won't let anything bad happen to you, ever again." She nodded silently, and Lorenzo left the room, with a heavy heart. He went upstairs to his office on the second floor and immediately called Marcus Duarte, his lawyer and one of the few true friends he had. "Marcus, I need everything you can find on Carlos Alberto Mendez, state deputy. Everything. Assets, connections, scandals, dirty tricks, everything. May I ask why? Let's just say he messed with the wrong person. Lorenzo, this guy is dangerous. He has connections with people who don't mess around." "I know. That's why I need information. And Marcus, I want complete discretion. No one can know we're investigating him." "Understood. I'll send you what I can get by tomorrow." After hanging up, Lorenzo stood at the office window, looking out at the ocean. Below, he could see Amelia on her bedroom balcony, also looking out at the water. 8 years. 8 years of thinking she had abandoned him because she didn't love him enough, when in fact she had sacrificed herself to protect him. And now here she was, pregnant by another man, by the man who had tortured and destroyed her. But still, the only woman Lorenzo had ever truly loved. The situation was too complex to be resolved with anger or impulse. It took planning, strategy, and above all patience to regain the trust she had lost in everyone and everything. That night, Lorenzo could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Amelia's bruised face, heard her broken voice telling him about the loss of her baby. And a cold, calculating fury grew inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Carlos Alberto Mendez had destroyed the life of the woman he loved, had killed his son, had held Amelia hostage in an abusive relationship for years. It was time for him to meet a Dalvia when he was truly pissed. Around 3 in the morning, Lorenzo heard noises coming from the kitchen. He went downstairs and found Amelia standing in front of the open refrigerator, a lost expression on her face. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, so as not to scare her. She turned around, and he realized she had been crying. I'm sorry, I was hungry, but I don't know if I can. Of course you can. This is your home now. Lorenzo walked over, opening the cabinets. How about I make something for both of us? I can't sleep either. Amelia hesitated, but then nodded. Can you cook? I learned out of necessity. When you live alone for 8 years, you either learn or starve. She gave him a small smile, the first since waking up in the hospital, and Lorenzo felt something warm inside his chest. He made them simple sandwiches and chamomile tea, and they sat at the kitchen table, eating in silence as the rain continued to beat against the windows. Why didn't you ever get married? Amelia asked suddenly. Lorenzo stopped chewing, surprised by the question. How do you know I didn't get married? There's no ring mark on your finger, and the house has no feminine touch. Observant as ever, he took a sip of tea. I've never met anyone worth my while. In 8 years? In 8 years. He looked at her directly. And you? Besides him, was there anyone? Amelia shook her head. No, after everything that happened, I couldn't trust anyone anymore. And when I was with Carlos, he wouldn't let me have a life of my own. He kept you isolated. Absolutely. I couldn't. Work, I couldn't have friends, I couldn't go out alone. The only freedom I had was when he was away on business. She touched her stomach unconsciously. It was on one of those trips that I was able to get my fertility treatment. He didn't even know I was trying to get pregnant until it worked. Lorenzo frowned. He didn't want children? Amelia hesitated, and he realized there was more to her answer. It's complicated. Mel, if we're going to live here together, you need to trust me. You don't have to tell me everything now, but you can't lie. She sighed, seeming to struggle with herself. The treatment was done with frozen genetic material. From before the accident, Lorenzo felt the world stop around him. What genetic material? The revelation hit him like a tsunami. Lorenzo stood up from his chair so abruptly that it fell to the floor with a crash. Mine? What do you mean mine? Before everything happened, when we were planning to get married, you said you wanted us to do full fertility tests, to make sure we wouldn't have any problems when we wanted to have children. Amelia's words were coming out in a rush now. You kept samples at a private clinic in Florianopolis. I remember the scans, but Lorenzo ran his hands through his hair, trying to process the information. You're saying that this baby... He's your son, Lorenzo. He's always been yours. The silence that followed was absolute. Lorenzo stared at Amelia as if she were a ghost, and she waited for his reaction with her heart racing. Finally, he approached, her slowly kneeling beside the chair where she was sitting. Why didn't you tell me before? Because I was afraid of your reaction. Because I didn't know if you would want to take on a child that was fathered during my relationship with another man. Because... Her voice trailed off. Because I didn't know if you still had feelings for me after all these years. Lorenzo cupped, her face in his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. Amelia, I have never stopped loving you, not a day, not an hour, not a minute in these 8 years. You are the only woman I have ever truly loved, and this baby... He touched her belly reverently. This baby is the miracle I thought I would never have. The tears Amelia had held back all night finally fell, and Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, feeling her body tremble against his. There in the quiet kitchen of the house on the edge of the cliff, with the storm raging outside, they both allowed themselves to cry for everything they had lost and for everything they might be able to get back. But Lorenzo knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Carlos Alberto Mendez didn't know where Amelia was, but it wouldn't take him long to find out. And when he did, he would come looking for her with all the fury of a man who wouldn't accept losing what he considered his property. It was time for Lorenzo d'Alvia to show that not all power came from politics. Sometimes it came from the ability to protect what you love no matter the cost. Dawn arrived with a deceptive calm. Lorenzo woke up on the sofa in the living room where he had fallen asleep after Amelia had finally returned to the bedroom, exhausted by the weight of the revelations of the early morning. His body protested against the bad night's sleep, but his mind remained on high alert, processing every detail of the conversation they had had. Her son, The baby Amelia was carrying was her son. The revelation still hit him in waves, mixing joy with a fury that grew with each passing hour. Carlos Alberto Mendez had not only tortured the woman he loved, he had made her live for 3 years as a prisoner, pregnant with another man's child. Without knowing that she was carrying in her womb the only good thing that remained of the love they had shared. Lorenzo stood up, stretching his aching muscles, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Through the window, he could see the sea, stretching to the horizon, seemingly calm after the storm of the previous night. But he knew these waters well. He knew that the calm was temporary and that another storm would soon arrive. The phone rang at 7 in the morning. Marcus. "Got some information on your congressman, friend." The lawyer's voice sounded strained even through the line. "Lorenzo, this guy is much more rotten than we imagined. He sends Carlos Alberto Mendez, 42 years old, 3 terms as state deputy, officially married to Helena Vasconcelos Mendez, daughter of Senator Vasconcelos. 2 children from the marriage, 15-year-old twins." Marcus paused. "But that's just a facade. The guy has a history of domestic violence that was covered up 5 times by his office. His wife has already been hospitalized 3 times with domestic accidents." Lorenzo clenched his free fist. "Continue." "He has links to the money laundering scheme that was investigated last year, but he managed to get away with it due to a lack of evidence. And there's more. Unconfirmed information suggests that he is keeping at least 3 women in private prison spread out between Florianopolis and Blumenau." Prison? Women who were forced to live with him, who cannot go out, cannot work, and do not have a life of their own. One of them, according to my sources, mysteriously disappeared 2 months ago. The family filed a police report, but the investigation was closed due to lack of evidence. Lorenzo felt his stomach churn. Amelia had managed to escape a fate that could have been much worse. "And there's one more thing, Lorenzo, something you're not going to like hearing." He speaks. "Your father's company has business with him, contracts to supply equipment for the electoral campaign that total almost 2 million reais in the last 6 months. The silence that followed was deafening. Lorenzo felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "What do you mean, my father's company?" "D'Alvia Tech supplies sound equipment, screens and communication systems for his political events. Contracts signed by Antonio D'Alvia himself." Lorenzo hung up the phone without saying goodbye and stood in the middle of the kitchen trying to process the information. His father, Antonio D'Alvia, the man who had built a technology empire based on ethics and transparency, was doing business with the monster who had destroyed Amelia's life. "Lorenzo." Her voice made him turn. Amelia stood in the kitchen doorway, wearing one of the T-shirts he had bought her at the hospital. The garment, too big for her thin body, highlighted the curve of her belly even more. "Is everything okay? You look pale. We need to talk." His voice came out harsher than he intended. Amelia stiffened immediately, and Lorenzo realized that she had interpreted the tone as rejection. He quickly approached her, lightly touching her arms. "It's not about us. It's about him." "About Carlos Alberto. What did you discover?" Lorenzo led her to the kitchen table, poured coffee for them both, and told her everything he had learned. He saw Amelia's face pale with each revelation, especially when he mentioned the other women. "I knew I wasn't the only one," she murmured, staring into her coffee cup with tears in her eyes. "Sometimes when he came home, he'd have different perfume on his clothes or lipstick marks that weren't mine." "Amelia." "The woman who disappeared was Carla Mendonça. She worked as a secretary in the Chamber of Deputies for 2 years until he took an interest in her." Amelia wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. "She tried to warn me once. She said he was dangerous, that I should run away. 2 days later, he told me that she had decided to change her life and moved abroad." "Son of a bitch," Lorenzo muttered under his breath. "There's one more thing you need to know." Amelia took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep water. "Your family, they've known Carlos for a long time." Lorenzo frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your father and Carlos have been in business for years, not just recently. Since before I met you." Her voice grew faint. "That's how Carlos found out about us, through the business with D'Alvia Tech. The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. You're saying my father... I don't know if your father knew about us specifically, but Carlos had access to the D'Alvia family. He attended events, business dinners. It was at one of these events that he saw me for the first time, when you took me as your date to that gala dinner in 2015. Lorenzo remembered the night, a charity event organized by the Family Foundation, where he had officially introduced Amelia as his girlfriend for the first time. She had looked beautiful, wearing a blue dress that highlighted her eyes, and he was proud to have her by his side. He was there. At the table next to ours, he spent the whole night watching me, but you didn't notice because you were busy talking to the investors." Amelia touched her belly unconsciously. "After that night, he started investigating my life. He found out where I lived, where I worked, who my friends were, and he found out that you were planning to propose to me." "How could he know that?" Amelia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Lorenzo, you bought the ring at the most expensive jewelry store in Florianopolis, a unique piece, specially designed. The jeweler mentioned the purchase in a social conversation, and the information reached Carlos." Lorenzo ran his hands through his hair, feeling frustration build. "So he planned it all, from the beginning. He once told me that he had decided to have me the moment he saw me at that dinner. He said I was too perfect to waste on some spoiled brat." Amelia's voice turned bitter. "His threats against you were just a way to get me to cooperate. If I hadn't agreed, he would have found another way to have me." Lorenzo stood up from his chair, walking to the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to peek through the clouds, but he couldn't feel any warmth. All he felt was a cold, calculating anger growing inside his chest. "I need to talk to my father." "Lorenzo, no." Amelia stood up as well, approaching him. "If you confront your family now, you might alert Carlos to where I am. My father needs to know what kind of man he is financing. What if he already knows?" The question hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Lorenzo turned to face her, seeing in Amelia's eyes a fear that went beyond the physical terror Carlos Alberto caused her. "What are you insinuating?" "I'm saying that his family is too powerful and too well-informed not to know who Carlos Alberto Mendez really is. And if they know and still do business with him..." She didn't finish the sentence. "Are you saying my family might be involved in the shit he does? I'm saying you need to be very careful who you trust until you find out the truth." Lorenzo turned to the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks of the cliff. The life he had built based on trust in his family and the values he believed had raised him was crumbling before his eyes. "Then I don't trust anyone. Only... you? Lorenzo, no." He turned to her, renewed determination in his gaze. "No more secrets between us, no more lies. If we're going to face this together, let's face it knowing the full truth." Amelia nodded slowly. "Then you need to know about the night I lost our first baby." Lorenzo felt his stomach tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Tell me." "It wasn't just Carlos's men who hurt me that night. There was someone else there, someone you know." "Who?" "Marcus Duarte." Lorenzo's world came crashing down for the second time that morning. Marcus, his lawyer, his friend, the man he had trusted for years, was involved with Carlos Alberto. "That's not possible." "He was there, Lorenzo, driving the car that took me to the place where they made me lose the baby." Amelia's voice was firm now, as if she knew this revelation would be the hardest of all. "He was the one who chose the doctor, who performed the procedure. He was the one who made sure I could never have children naturally again." Lorenzo slumped back in his chair, feeling as if he had been shot in the chest. Marcus, the man he had called the night before to investigate. Carlos Alberto was the same man who had tortured Amelia 8 years ago. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I knew you wouldn't believe me. Because Marcus has been your friend for years, and I'm just the woman who abandoned you 8 years ago." Amelia walked over to him, kneeling beside his chair. "And because I was afraid that if you knew, You would do something stupid that would put your life in danger. He cheated on me. Marcus cheated on me 8 years ago and I didn't even know it. Lorenzo, listen. If Marcus is involved with Carlos, then he knows you were investigating last night. He knows you have information, and he probably already knows I'm here. Realization hit Lorenzo like a bolt of lightning. He had handed Amelia over to the same men who had tortured her years ago. Quickly, he picked up the phone and called the house's security system. Hello, this is Lorenzo de Alvia. I want full activation of the property's security system. Code red. No one enters or leaves without my personal authorization. Mr. de Alvia, may I ask if there is any specific threat? Consider it so, and I want armed surveillance teams at both entrances to the property, now. Immediately, sir. Lorenzo hung up and turned to Amelia. We're going to have to get out. Of here? Where to? I don't know yet, but we can't stay here. If Marcus knows where you are, Carlos Alberto knows too. As if his words were prophetic, the house phone rang. Lorenzo looked at the display and felt his blood run cold. Marcus Duarte. No answer, Amelia whispered. I have to answer. If I don't, he'll know we found out. Lorenzo took a deep breath and answered, forcing his voice to sound normal. Marcus. Lorenzo, we need to talk. Now. About what? About the woman you're hiding in your house. Lorenzo closed his eyes. It was too late. I don't know what you're talking about. Lorenzo, we've been friends for 10 years. Do you think I can't tell when you're lying? Marcus's voice grew harder. You made a very serious mistake by getting involved with Amelia Santos again. What mistake? She belongs to Carlos Alberto, and men like Carlos Alberto don't like it when someone messes with what's theirs. Amelia doesn't belong to anyone. Yes, she does. She has for 3 years, and she's carrying his child. Marcus paused meaningfully. Or isn't she? Lorenzo felt his heart race. Marcus knew about the baby's real paternity. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you know, just like you know that the clinic where you did your premarital exams 8 years ago stored your genetic material, just like you know that Amelia used that material to get pregnant without Carlos's knowledge. Son of a bitch. Lorenzo, you have 2 options. Hand Amelia over voluntarily and no one gets hurt, or we wait for you to try to escape and then things get nasty. Fuck you, Marcus. You have 2 hours to decide. After that, we'll enter your property and search for what's ours. And Lorenzo, if you try to make any jokes, remember that we've known your every move for 8 years. We know your routes, your hiding places, your contacts. There's no place you can hide that we won't find. The call was cut off, and Lorenzo stood there, staring at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. 2 hours, he said to Amelia. Then, we have to leave now. Where to? He just said he knows my every move. Amelia stood up, walking to the living room window. Outside, the estate looked peaceful, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before it turned into a prison. There's a place, she said finally. Where? My sister, Elena. She lives in Gramado in the mountains. She married a military police officer 2 years ago. Carlos never knew about her existence because she moved there when she was a teenager to live with our aunt. Lorenzo frowned. Do you have a sister? Twin, identical. Amelia turned to him. Carlos never found out because she changed her last name when she got married and never showed up in Florianopolis. Elena was always smarter than me. Why did you never tell me about her? Because it was my ace up my sleeve, the only place I could hide if I ever managed to escape. Amelia touched her stomach. Elena knows everything. About Carlos, about you, about what happened to us. She's been waiting for my call for 3 years. Lorenzo nodded. Gramado was almost 300 kilometers away, in the mountains of the Serra Gaucha. It would be difficult to get there without being tracked, but not impossible. We'll need a car they don't recognize. I have an idea. Amelia went to the bag she had left in the room and came back with a crumpled business card. Do you know this guy? Lorenzo looked at the card. Roberto Silva, mechanic, workshop in the neighboring town. No. He helped me once, 2 years ago, when I managed to escape from Carlos for a few hours and my car broke down on the highway. Roberto drove me back to town, but he didn't ask any questions, and he didn't tell anyone that he saw me crying and hurt." Amelia put the card away. "He runs a small garage and does odd jobs hauling used cars. If we explain the situation, maybe he'll help us." "What if he tells Carlos?" "Roberto lost his teenage daughter 5 years ago. She was killed by her boyfriend in a domestic violence case that was never properly investigated because the boy was the son of influential people." Amelia looked Lorenzo in the eye. "He once told me that if he could help a woman escape from an abusive man, he would do it without thinking twice." Lorenzo nodded. It was risky, but it was the only option they had. "Then let's go." They left. The house through the back, avoiding the security cameras that Lorenzo knew Marcus might be monitoring remotely. The walk through the woods to the back road took almost an hour, with Amelia having to stop several times because of fatigue and nausea from pregnancy. "Are you okay?" Lorenzo asked, holding her as she staggered down a steep slope. "I am. But—" He could see that she was pale and breathing hard. "Amelia, if you're not feeling well, we can't stop, Lorenzo. If they get to your house and don't find us, they'll spread the search across the entire region. Our only chance is to get to Roberto before they find out we're gone." Lorenzo helped her climb into the back of an abandoned pickup truck they found on the road, and from there they managed to get down to the neighboring town without being seen. Roberto's workshop was on a dirt road at the end of town, a modest but well-kept place. Roberto Silva was a man in his early 50s, tall and thin, with the calloused hands of someone who had worked with iron for decades. When he saw Amelia enter the workshop, his face lit up with a genuine smile. "Amelia, girl, it's good to see you." The smile disappeared when he noticed her condition. "But what happened? Are you okay?" "Roberto, I need your help, and this time it's very serious." Lorenzo watched as Amelia gave the mechanic a brief version of the situation. He saw the man's expression harden when she mentioned Carlos Alberto, and he saw a familiar determination come into his eyes. "You need to get out of the area," Roberto said when she was done, "and you need a car that no one will track." "Exactly." Roberto walked to the back of the workshop and pointed to a white Volkswagen Gol, an old model but well preserved. "This car belonged to my daughter. It's been sitting idle for 5 years, but it runs perfectly. All documents are up to date, full tank of gas." He handed the keys to Lorenzo. "Take it, and don't worry about returning it." "Roberto, I can't accept—" "Yes, you can." The mechanic interrupted Amelia firmly. "My daughter would be your age today if she had had the chance to escape the bastard who killed her. Consider what I'm doing for her." Amelia hugged Roberto with tears in her eyes, and Lorenzo shook the man's hand with a gratitude he could not express in words. "There's one more thing," Roberto said when they were in the car. "You can't go straight to where you're thinking of going. Carlos Alberto has contacts in the highway patrol, and they'll be looking for you on the main roads." "So what route do you suggest?" Lorenzo asked. Roberto went into the workshop and came back with an old road map, marking an alternative route with a red pen. "This road here is longer, but it goes through small towns where no one will look. For you'll get to Gramado in about 6 hours, but without going through the main highways." He folded the map and handed it to Amelia. "And there's one important thing. There's a federal highway police checkpoint on BR 116 today. It's a routine operation, but if you go there, you'll be identified." Lorenzo nodded, putting the map away. "Roberto, how can I thank you?" "Taking care of her," the mechanic replied simply, "and making that son of a bitch pay for what he did." They walked away from the workshop. Amelia stood silently, staring out the window. Lorenzo could feel the tension emanating from her, mixed with something that felt like relief. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How strange it is to trust someone again." She turned to him. "Roberto helped me without knowing you, without knowing if we were trustworthy people. Just because he believed I was in danger. There are good people in the world, Mel. They're just hard to find sometimes. And there are people like Marcus who pretend to be good until they show who they really are." Lorenzo gripped the steering. "Wheel tighter." Marcus's betrayal was still an open wound, and he knew it would take time to fully process what he had learned. "Can I ask you something?" Amelia said after a few miles of silence. Of course. When you found out the baby was yours, what was the first feeling you had? Lorenzo thought for a moment before answering. Fear. Fear. Afraid that you'd leave again, afraid that now that you knew I still loved you, you'd use it against me. He glanced at her quickly before turning his eyes back to the road. And afraid that I won't be able to be the father this child deserves. Why wouldn't I be able to? Because I didn't have a good example. My father, he was always more of a businessman than a father. I grew up being raised by nannies and private tutors, seeing Antonio D'Alvia more on TV than at home. Lorenzo sighed. And now I find out he might be involved with the man who destroyed our lives. What example does that give me of being a good father? Amelia reached out, touching his arm lightly. You're not your father, Lorenzo. The fact that you're here running away with me, risking everything to protect me, proves that. What if I'm not enough? What if I can't protect you too? Then let's figure it out together. Her voice was firm now. Because one thing I've learned, in these 8 years, sometimes it's not about being strong enough to face everything alone. Sometimes it's about finding someone who wants to face it with you. Lorenzo felt something warm inside his chest, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Hope. For the first time since everything had started, he allowed himself to believe that maybe they could get out of this situation, not only alive, but together. But, as they drove through the back roads of the Santa Catarina Mountains, neither of them knew that Carlos Alberto Mendez was much closer than they had imagined, and that their escape had triggered a manhunt that would involve not only the congressman's henchmen, but also secrets of the D'Alvia family that Lorenzo could never have imagined. The road wound between mountains covered in Atlantic forest, and with each curve they made, Lorenzo felt that they were leaving the past behind and walking towards an uncertain future, but that for the first time in 8 years, they would face it together. Gramado emerged from the mountain fog like a fairy tale town, its German-style houses dotting the green hills in surreal contrast to the tension Lorenzo and Amelia had been carrying for hours. The white gold drove up the steep streets of the tourist town as the sun began to set, dyeing the sky in orange hues that should have been romantic, but to them seemed like an omen. That's it, Amelia pointed to a small but cozy house with a well-kept garden and a white picket fence separating it from the street. Elena's house. Lorenzo parked in front of the property, observing his surroundings with the instinct of someone who had learned to be suspicious of everything. The street was quiet, typically residential, with neighbors who had probably known each other for years and children playing in the yards. It was the kind of place where normal people lived normal lives, far from the power games and violence that had marked their lives. Before they could even get out of the car, the front door opened and a woman who looked exactly like Amelia appeared on the porch. Elena Santos Silva had the same wavy brown hair, the same expressive green eyes, the same delicate frame as her sister. But there was something about her that Amelia had lost over the years. Light in her eyes, a confident posture that spoke of someone who had never been broken. Mel. Elena ran towards the car, and Lorenzo watched the sisters' reunion with a tightness in his chest. The two hugged each other with the strength of someone who hadn't seen each other for years, and he could hear the muffled sobs of both of them. You came, Elena murmured, pulling back to look at her sister's face. After all these years, you finally came. I had no choice. He found out about the baby and... Amelia couldn't finish her sentence. I know everything. Elena looked over her sister's shoulder at Lorenzo, who had gotten out of the car, but was keeping a respectful distance. And you must be Lorenzo D'Alvia. Elena. He stepped closer, extending his hand. She ignored his outstretched hand and studied him with a piercing gaze that made him feel completely exposed. You're more handsome than she said, he finally commented, drawing a nervous smile from Amelia. But you also seem more troubled. Elena. What? I'm just telling the truth. Elena finally smiled, and Lorenzo saw in that smile a little of the Amelia he had met 8 years ago. Come on, let's go inside. You must be exhausted. The house was even more welcoming inside than it looked from the outside. Comfortable furniture, Family photographs on the walls, the smell of fresh coffee and homemade cake in the air. It was a real home, and Lorenzo felt a pang of envy as he realized that this was something he had never had. "Ricardo's working," Eleanor explained, pouring coffee for the three of them at the kitchen table. "Night shift. But he knows you're here and left a message that if you need him, he can mobilize some trusted colleagues." "Trusted colleagues?" Lorenzo asked. "Police officers who aren't in the pockets of corrupt deputies," Elena replied, with a frankness that surprised him. "You're not the first fugitives we've taken in here. Ricardo has experience protecting women fleeing abusive relationships." Amelia held her sister's hand. "Thank you, Elle, for everything." "Don't thank me yet, it's not over yet." Eleanor turned to Lorenzo. "I need to talk to you, alone." Lorenzo looked at Amelia, who nodded. "You can go. I really need to take a shower." When? They were alone in the kitchen. Elena looked at Lorenzo with a seriousness that made him prepare for the worst. "Do you love my sister?" "Yes. Even after everything that happened, even knowing that she spent 3 years with another man." "She didn't spend 3 years with another man. She spent 3 years being a prisoner of a monster. There's a difference." Elena nodded, seeming to approve of the answer. "What about the baby? How do you feel about raising a child that was conceived during this time?" "He's my son," Lorenzo replied without hesitation. "Biologically and emotionally. And I will love him regardless of the circumstances of his conception." "Good, because you're going to need all that conviction for what's to come." Lorenzo frowned. "What do you mean?" Elena stood up, walking to the kitchen window. "Carlos Alberto, Mendez is not just a corrupt congressman, Lorenzo. He is part of a much larger network. A network that includes politicians, businessmen, judges, and at least one member of his family." "My father." "Not just your father, your uncle too." "Eduardo." "Dalvia." Elena turned to him. "You think you ran away, but in fact you were directed exactly where they wanted you to go." Lorenzo's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "The route Roberto suggested, the garage where you got the car, even my existence. Carlos Alberto has known about it all for years. He let you come this far because he needs you in an isolated place to do what he plans to do." "What the fuck, Elena?" "Sit down and let me explain." Elena returned to the table, but this time there was a tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. 6 months ago, Ricardo began investigating a human trafficking ring that operates between Santa Catarina and Rio Grande do Sul. Young women who disappear without a trace, mainly women from poor families who no one is looking for. Lorenzo felt his stomach turn. And the name Carlos Alberto Mendez appears in all the investigations, not as the main suspect but as a facilitator. He provides political cover for the operations. Elena paused. "But he doesn't work alone. He has partners who finance the operation and provide the logistics. My family. Dalvia Tech is used to transport women. Delivery trucks that officially carry technological equipment but actually transport people." Elena looked Lorenzo in the eye. "Your father may not know the details, but your uncle Eduardo coordinates everything." Lorenzo ran his hands through his hair, feeling the world crash down around him for the 3rd time in 2 days. "How do you know all this?" "Because Amelia wasn't the only woman Eduardo Dalvia handed over to Carlos Alberto over the years, and some of the others managed to escape." Elena pulled a folder of documents from inside a filing cabinet. "Ricardo and I documented everything. We have names, dates, photographs. We have enough evidence to send half of Santa Catarina's elite to jail." "Then why didn't they do it?" "Because we needed the final piece of the puzzle. We needed someone within the Dalvia family who could confirm the information and serve as a witness." Elena smiled humorlessly. "Someone like you." Lorenzo was silent, processing the information. Everything made sense now. How easily Carlos Alberto had discovered his relationship with Amelia, how quickly Marcus had gathered information the night before, even the exact escape route that had led him here. "We are the bait. You were the bait. Now you are the solution." Eleanor opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and testimonies. "With you as a witness, and Amelia willing to speak, Publicly, we can put an end to this network once and for all. What if they kill us first? Don't go, not here. Elena pointed to the windows of the house, and Lorenzo noticed that there were men posted discreetly around the property. Ricardo mobilized an official military police operation. As soon as you arrived here, this house became a protected zone. At tea. That moment, Amelia returned to the kitchen, her hair still damp from the shower and wearing clothes borrowed from her sister. She stopped in the doorway when she saw the tense expressions on their faces. What is happening? Elena and Lorenzo told her everything, watching Amelia's face pale with each revelation. When they were done, she sat down heavily in a chair, her hands instinctively protecting her stomach. So we never really had a chance to escape, she muttered. Not in the way you thought, Elena admitted. But now we have a chance to end all. Of this for good. As Carlos Alberto is on his way here. He'll probably arrive in the next few hours with Eduardo Dalvia and some henchmen. Elena looked at the two of them. When they arrive, we'll be ready, and this time they'll find out they messed with the wrong people. This is crazy, Amelia said. You're using us as bait for a sting operation. What if it goes wrong? It won't go wrong. The voice came from the kitchen door where a tall, dark-haired man had appeared. Ricardo Silva, Elena's husband, still wearing his military police uniform. Sorry to interrupt, but the situation has changed. What do you mean? Lorenzo stood up. Carlos Alberto is not coming alone. We have intercepted communications indicating that he is bringing at least 10 armed men. What's more, his father is also with them. Lorenzo felt like he had been punched in the stomach. My father? Antonio de Alvia was seen boarding the family's private helicopter an hour ago, heading Gramado. Ricardo approached the table. It seems your family has decided to resolve this matter personally. Antonio didn't know anything, Lorenzo said, more to himself than to the others. We know, Elena said softly. Investigations indicate that your father was kept in the dark about Eduardo's activities, but now that everything has come to light, he wants to protect the family name. Even if it means handing me over to Carlos Alberto. Even if it means choosing between you and the empire he built, Richard replied honestly. Amelia stood up and walked over to Lorenzo, cupping his face in her hands. Hey, look at me. It doesn't matter what your father chooses. It doesn't matter what happened in the past. What matters is what we choose now. And what do you choose? I choose to fight. I choose not to run away anymore. I choose to trust that, together, we are stronger than all of them. She touched his forehead with hers. I choose you, Lorenzo. Forever, this time. Lorenzo kissed her, a desperate and passionate kiss that tasted like goodbye and promise at the same time. When they separated, there were tears in both of their eyes. Then let's get this over with, he said. The next 2 hours passed in intense preparation. Ricardo coordinated the positions of the police team via radio. Elena reviewed the documents that would serve as evidence, and Lorenzo and Amelia waited in tense silence, alternating between moments of intimate conversation and periods of solitary reflection. I'm scared, Amelia confessed, as she leaned against Lorenzo's chest on the living room couch. Me too. Not Carlos Alberto. I'm afraid that after all this is over, you'll realize that you're not worth it, that all this drama, all this complication, she paused, that I'm not worth it. Lorenzo turned her around to face him. Amelia Santos, you are. The only thing in my life that has ever been worth it. Everything else, the money, the company, even my own family, is just incidental. You and our son are the only real thing I have. Even if I come with all this baggage, even if I can never be the carefree woman I was 8 years ago, I don't want the woman from 8 years ago. I want the woman who is here now. The woman who survived hell and still chooses to love. The woman who is carrying our child and fighting every day to give him a better future. Lorenzo kissed her forehead. This woman is so much stronger and so much more amazing than that 23-year-old girl I knew. Amelia smiled through her tears. How do you always know what to say? Years of practice thinking about what I should have said 8 years ago. The tender moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching helicopters. Ricardo appeared in the room wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying communications equipment. They've arrived. 2 aircraft, confirmed presence of Antonio de Alvia and Carlos Alberto Mendez, along with approximately 12 armed men. He handed Lorenzo and Emilia body armor. Put these on, and remember, when I say duck, you duck. When I say run, you run. Understood? They both nodded, and Lorenzo helped Emilia put on the vest, which barely closed because of her belly. They'll land on the soccer field of the municipal school, 2 blocks from here, Ricardo continued. My team is positioned on all access. Routes to the house. When they get here, we'll be ready. What if they don't come here? Lorenzo asked. They will come because you will call them and arrange a meeting. Lorenzo frowned. What do you mean? Elena appeared with a phone in her hand. You're going to call your father and tell him you want to negotiate, that you're willing to hand over Emilia in exchange for assurances that you won't be harmed. You, Pao, want me to lie to my father and give away the woman I love. We want you to get your father and Carlos Alberto to come here, where we can control them, Ricardo explained. It's the only way to ensure we have everyone involved in the same place, at the same time. Emilia took Lorenzo's hand. Do it. I trust you. Lorenzo picked up the phone with shaking hands. Antonio de Alvia's number had been etched in his memory since he was a child. When the call connected, his father's familiar, authoritative voice answered. Lorenzo. Father. Where are you? In Gramado, with Emilia. Lorenzo took a deep breath. I want to negotiate. What kind of negotiation? I hand her over to you. In return, I want assurances that my life will return to normal, that the company will not be harmed, and that I can continue my life as if nothing had happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. And the child? What child? Don't make a fool of me, Lorenzo. We know she's pregnant. We know it's your child. Lorenzo closed his eyes. There were no more secrets. What do you want? We want you to come home and forget this woman exists. We want you to marry someone suitable and carry on the family name. And we want this whole situation to be resolved without a trace. And Emilia? Emilia will return to where she should have always been, with Carlos Alberto. What about the baby? That's not your problem. Lorenzo felt anger explode inside his chest, but he forced himself to keep his voice controlled. Where do you want me to meet you? You tell us you're hiding somewhere in the city. Lorenzo looked at Ricardo, who nodded. 247 Hortensia Street, a white house with a fence. Can you come alone? We'll only take what's necessary to ensure you fulfill your end of the bargain. Understood. How long will it take you to get here? 20 minutes. The call ended, and Lorenzo stared at the phone as if it were a smoking gun. Well, he said finally, my father chose the Empire. Emilia walked over to him, wrapping him in a tight hug. Then we choose each other. The next 20 minutes were spent in final preparation. Ricardo coordinated positions via radio, Elena hid the documents in a safe place, and Lorenzo and Emilia prepared for the final confrontation. Whatever happens, Lorenzo said, cupping Emilia's face in his hands, I love you. I love you and I love our son. Nothing they say or do will change that. I love you too, and when this is all over, we'll start our real life. No secrets, no running away, no fear. Promise? I promise. The sound of approaching cars interrupted the moment. Ricardo appeared at the door of the room, signaling for them to get into position. They've arrived, 3 vehicles, confirmed presence of Antonio de Alvia, Carlos Alberto, Mendez Eduardo d'Alvia, and approximately 8 armed men. He looked at Lorenzo and Emilia. Remember, let them speak first. The more they say, the more evidence we will have on record. Lorenzo nodded, positioning himself in front of Emilia, in a protective stance. Through the window, he could see his father getting out of one of the cars, dressed in an impeccable suit as always, but with an expression Lorenzo had never seen before. Beside him, Carlos Alberto Mendez, a man of average height with grey hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, Watch the house like a predator studying its prey. The doorbell rang. Ricardo opened the door, maintaining an official but respectful posture. "Mr. Dalvia, Deputy Mendes." "Where is my son?" Antonio Dalvia entered the house without waiting for an invitation, followed by Carlos Alberto and two men in suits who were clearly armed security guards. "Here, Dad." Antonio stopped when he saw Lorenzo shielding Emilia with his body. For a moment his face showed an expression that might have been grief, but it quickly hardened again. "Lorenzo, get out of the way." "No. Don't be childish. This situation has gone too far." "I agree." Lorenzo stepped forward. "Then let's finish her off, once and for all." Carlos Alberto laughed, an unpleasant sound that echoed through the room. "Boy, you have no idea what you're up against." "Yes, I have an idea. I'm facing a corrupt congressman who traffics women, an uncle who finances the operations, and a father who chose money over his own son." "Lorenzo," Antonio's voice came out like a bark. "It's true, isn't it? You knew what Carlos Alberto did to Emilia. You knew he kept her prisoner, that he hurt her, that he used her as an object." Lorenzo felt Emilia touch his back in a gesture of support, "and yet you did business with him." "We did what was necessary to protect the family's interests," Eduardo Dalvia spoke for the first time. He was an older, crueler version of Antonio with cold eyes that showed no remorse. "Emilia Santos has always been a problem, an obstacle that needed to be removed." "An obstacle?" "You were the heir to an empire, Lorenzo. You couldn't get mixed up with some waitress from a dysfunctional family." Eduardo stepped closer. Carlos Alberto offered an elegant solution. He would get the girl. You could forget about this teenage crush, and everyone would win. Except Emilia. Emilia got more than she deserved. A house, food, expensive clothes, the chance to live with a man of position. Carlos Alberto finally spoke, and his voice had a possessive tone that made Lorenzo clench his fists. She should have been grateful. Grateful for being raped and beaten. Grateful to have a life I could never have had otherwise. "Son of a bitch," Lorenzo advanced, but Emilia held him back. "Lorenzo, no. Let them talk. Let them incriminate themselves." Carlos Alberto laughed again. "Incriminate? Girl, do you think we're afraid of something? You have no proof of anything." "Yes, we do." Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway, carrying the folder of documents. "We have all the evidence we need to send the three of you to prison for the rest of your lives." Antonio frowned. "Who are you?" "Elena Santos Silva, Emilia's sister, and investigator for the civil police of Rio Grande do Sul." The silence that followed was tense. Lorenzo saw Carlos Alberto turn pale, and Eduardo exchange a nervous look with the security guards. "You brought us here," Antonio said slowly, beginning to understand the situation. "We brought you here," Ricardo confirmed, appearing with two other military police officers. "Colonel Ricardo Silva, commander of Operation Freedom. Gentlemen, you are under arrest." What happened next was quick and violent. One of Carlos Alberto's bodyguards pulled out his gun, but was immediately knocked down by a rubber bullet fired by one of the police officers. Eduardo tried to run toward the door, but was intercepted and immobilized. Carlos Alberto, seeing that there was no escape, went after Emilia with a murderous fury. "If I can't have you, no one can." Lorenzo threw himself between the two, receiving the blow that was intended for Emilia in the chest. Pain exploded in his chest, but he managed to hold Carlos Alberto until the police officers restrained him. "Lorenzo!" Emilia knelt beside him, who was lying on the ground, breathing heavily. "I'm fine," he managed to say. "It's all fine. It's over." Antonio Dalvia watched the entire scene with an expression of absolute shock. When the police finished handcuffing Eduardo and Carlos Alberto, he approached his son. "Lorenzo, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know any of this." Lorenzo looked up at him from the floor, still supported by Emilia. "You knew they were in business together. You knew Carlos Alberto had a history of violence. You chose to ignore it because it was convenient." "Son, I'm not your son anymore." Lorenzo stood up with Emilia's help. ignoring the pain in his chest. A father protects his family. You protected the business. Antonio was silent for a long moment, watching Lorenzo and Emilia together, her protecting him now in the same way he had protected her moments before. "What do you want from me?" Antonio finally asked. "I want you to confess. I want you to tell the authorities everything you know about Eduardo and Carlos Alberto's operations. And I want you to accept the consequences of your actions. And if I do, will you come home?" Lorenzo looked at Emilia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "If you do this, maybe one day I can forgive you, but I'm not going back home. I'm going to build my own home, with my own family." Antonio looked at Emilia's rounded belly, and for the first time he seemed to really see the grandson that was to come. "Is it a boy or a girl?" "We don't know yet," Emilia replied softly. Can I be a part of the child's life?" Lorenzo and Emilia exchanged a look. "Maybe," Lorenzo said finally, "if you prove that you've changed. If you become the man I always thought you were." Antonio nodded slowly. "I'll confess. I'll tell everything I know, and I'll try. I'll try to be the grandfather this child deserves." 3 hours later, when all the statements had been collected and the prisoners had been transported to Florianopolis, Lorenzo and Emilia found themselves alone on the porch of Elena's house, watching the city lights come on in the surrounding hills. "Is it really over?" Emilia asked, nestled in his arms. "It's over. Carlos Alberto will spend the rest of his life in jail. Eduardo too, and my father. My father will have to face the consequences of his actions." "And us?" Lorenzo turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands, as he had done so many times in the last 48 hours. "We're going to start over. For real this time. No secrets, no fear, no one trying to tear us apart. What about your money, your company? When all this comes to light, D'Alvia Tech may not survive the scandal. Then, we'll build something new, together." Lorenzo smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since they'd met. "Do you remember those plans we had? About having a small company, about working on things that mattered? A technology consultancy for social organizations," Emilia said, smiling too. "You remember?" "I remember everything. Every dream we built together, every plan we made. And now we have time to make them all come true." Emilia touched her belly where the baby was moving, as if wanting to join in the conversation. "And him? How are we going to explain all this to our son when he grows up?" "Let's tell the truth. That true love sometimes needs to go through many trials before it wins. That sometimes you have to fight for what you love, and that in the end, when two people truly love each other, nothing in the world is strong enough to separate them forever. Even after 8 years of separation. Even after 8 years of separation. Even powerful families, even corrupt congressmen." Lorenzo kissed her forehead. "Even after all the hell we've been through, it only served to prove that our love is indestructible. I love you, Lorenzo D'Alvia, and I love you, Emilia Santos, forever this time, forever." 6 months later, on a sunny spring morning, Lorenzo held Helena D'Alvia Santos in his arms, a baby who had inherited her mother's green eyes and her father's stubbornness. The wedding ceremony had been small, intimate, celebrated in the garden of the house they had bought in Gramado, overlooking the mountains that had witnessed the end of a nightmare and the beginning of a new life. Elena was the godmother, Ricardo was the godfather, and Antonio D'Alvia, serving a semi-open sentence after collaborating with the justice system, watched the ceremony via video call, crying silently as he saw his son get married and meet his granddaughter. The company they had created together, Santos D'Alvia Consultoria, which specialized in technology for social organizations, was thriving. The D'Alvia Tech scandal had resulted in the family business going bankrupt, but it had also opened the door for something new and clean. Carlos Alberto Mendez was serving a 25-year sentence for racketeering, false imprisonment, rape, and attempted murder. Eduardo D'Alvia had received 15 years for the same crimes. The human trafficking ring had been completely dismantled, and more than 30 women had been freed. "What are you thinking about?" Amelia asked, approaching Lorenzo on the porch of their new home. "How funny fate is. If someone had told me 8 years ago that I would be happier without family money, married to you and raising our daughter in a small town, I would have thought they were crazy. And now? Now I know that there is no amount of money in the world that can pay for the peace of waking up every day next to the person you love, knowing that they chose to be there because they want to be, not because they need to be." Amelia smiled, leaning against him as they watched Helena sleep in the portable crib they had placed on the porch. "Do? You think she'll have a normal life, without all these complications we had? I think she'll have a real life, with parents who love each other, who fought for that love, and who will teach her that the right things are worth fighting for." Lorenzo kissed the top of Amelia's head. "And if she ever finds someone who's worth it, she'll know true love when she sees it." How did we know? As we knew. The phone rang inside the house, and Lorenzo went to answer it. It was Marcus Duarte calling from prison where he was serving a 12-year sentence for participating in the criminal network. "Lorenzo, I need to talk to you." "We have nothing to talk about, Marcus. I have information about your father, about things he didn't tell the police." Lorenzo almost hung up, but something in Marcus's voice made him hesitate. "What information?" "Your father didn't know everything, but he knew more than he admitted, and there are more people involved, people who are still at large." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I discovered that I'm going to be a father too, and I want my son to have the chance to grow up in a world where men like Carlos Alberto no longer exist." Lorenzo was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Send the information to the prosecutor in charge of the case. I don't want to be involved with this shit anymore." Lorenzo: "No, Marcus. You had your chance to do the right thing 8 years ago. You chose the wrong side. Now you face the consequences." Lorenzo hung up and returned to the balcony, where Amelia was waiting for him with a curious expression. Was it important? No, nothing more important than this. He wrapped his arms around her, looking at his sleeping daughter and the woman who had chosen to fight by his side until the end. "So everything is okay?" "Everything is perfect." And as the sun set over the mountains of Gramado, Lorenzo knew that finally, after 8 years of separation, 3 years of nightmares, and 2 days of confronting the past, he had found his place in the world. It wasn't in a mansion on the edge of a cliff. It wasn't in command of a technological empire. It wasn't amidst the luxury and power he had been born to inherit. His place was there, on that simple balcony, with the woman he loved and the daughter they had raised together, building a life based on true love, earned trust, and the certainty that, no matter how many storms came, they would face them together. Forever this time.